My son threw 40 years of my life into the trash, right in front of my eyes. My name is Claire. I am 71 years old and I am a widow. What he does not know is that the only thing in the trash was paper. That Saturday morning had started like a quiet little celebration just for me. The sun was streaming through the kitchen window, giving a golden glow to the worn tiles that I had picked out myself with Robert, my husband, over 40 years ago. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and the breaded chicken cutlets I was preparing with an almost sacred care. It had been weeks since my son, Mark, and his wife, Valerie, had come over for lunch. Their lives were a whirlwind of meetings, commitments, and a rush that I just did not understand anymore. That is why his call the day before, confirming they would be coming, filled my chest with a warmth I had almost forgotten. I was making his favorite meal, crispy chicken parmesan with extra creamy mashed potatoes, exactly the way Mark liked it since he was a little boy. As I pounded the meat on the wooden board, I hummed an old song from the radio, the kind they used to play back when Robert and I were dating. I felt happy, genuinely happy. I had the whole day planned out. We would eat lunch calmly without rushing. Afterward, I would serve them the homemade caramel pudding I had left chilling in the fridge since the night before. And then, while we had coffee, I would show them my surprise. On the top shelf of the old dining room cabinet, kept like a treasure, was the photo album. It was not just any album. Its cover was made of dark brown leather, already cracked from the years, with faded gold letters that read, "Our life." Robert had given it to me on our first anniversary. For 40 years, I had been the guardian of our memories. I had glued every single photo in there myself, using those little cardboard corners you cannot even find anymore. Underneath each one, with my shaky handwriting, I had written the date and a little note. Mark. First day of school, 1985. He cried until I promised him an ice cream. Our first vacation down in Florida. Robert sunburned like a lobster. I had found a photo of Mark taking his first steps right in that very dining room, holding onto the legs of the exact same table where we were about to eat. I wanted them to see the circle of life, the connection. I wanted to say to them, look, he is the spitting image of his dad. It was my way of telling them that even if they were rushing into the future, their roots still mattered, the roots I had cared for with so much love. This apartment is nothing fancy, a one-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with old trees and cracked sidewalks. Robert and I bought it with the first mortgage we ever got approved for, and we paid it off over 30 years. Every payment was a sacrifice. Robert worked double shifts at the factory, and I did sewing and alterations for the neighbors. We had no luxuries. Our vacations consisted of a week at the beach every 2 or 3 years. Our great passion, our only real vice, was collecting coins. We started almost by chance, with a silver coin that Robert's grandfather had given him. Little by little, we started learning. We would go to the downtown flea markets on Sundays. We would dig through dusty boxes in antique shops. Every coin had a story, a piece of a world that no longer existed. Robert used to say it was not an expense, it was an investment. These little pieces of metal, Claire, he would tell me, while polishing one with a soft cloth, they are going to take care of us when we get old. I would smile and brew him a cup of coffee. To me, they were just our little secret, our game. The photo album was the record of that life. There were photos of us at those flea markets, smiling, our hands dirty from digging through junk, but so happy. There was the photo of the day we bought this apartment, signing the papers with a cheap pen they loaned us at the realtor's office. By the time they arrived, the smell of chicken parmesan was already filling the whole house. Mark walked in first. He gave me a rushed kiss on the cheek that felt more like an obligation than affection. "Hey, Mom, it smells like fried food in here," he said, wrinkling his nose. Valerie walked in right behind him, not even looking up from her phone. "Hi, Claire," she muttered, her fingers flying across the screen. They sat down at the table without even taking off their coats. The conversation was just a monologue from them, complaining about how their new car burned too much gas, how they were thinking about taking a vacation to the Caribbean in the summer, how Mark's job was so stressful. I just listened and served the meal I had prepared with so much love. They ate fast, barely even mentioning the food. When I finished clearing the plates and brought out the coffee, my heart was beating a little faster. It was time. I walked over to the cabinet, carefully stepped onto a small stool, and brought down the heavy album. The dust of the years rose in a small golden cloud under the sunlight. I placed it on the table with ceremonial care. "I wanted to show you guys something," I said, my voice trembling slightly with emotion. Mark sighed, a long and exhausted sigh, as if I were asking him for the biggest favor in the world. Valerie did not even lift her head from her phone. I opened the first page. There were Robert and I on our wedding day. We were young, skinny, with expressions of pure shock and happiness that I could almost reach out and touch. "Look how young we were," I started to say. That was when Mark interrupted me. He did not look at me. He looked at the album with a mix of annoyance and pity. "Mom, please," he said. His voice was cold, sharp. "This again? They are just old pictures. The past is the past." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I insisted. "But look, this is the one I wanted to show you," I said, clumsily turning the pages until I reached the photo of him as a baby trying to walk. He did not even glance at it. He stood up from his chair. His shadow covered me completely. With a harsh motion, he slammed the album shut. The dry smack of the leather covers slapping together echoed in the silence of the dining room. "Mom, this is old trash," he said, and every single word felt like a physical blow. "Stop living in the past. You need to get with the times. This is why you are always alone, because you cling to things that nobody cares about anymore." And then he did the unthinkable. He grabbed the album, my treasure, the work of 40 years of love and memory, and walked into the kitchen. I was completely paralyzed. I could not move. I could not believe what I was seeing. He opened the trash can, the big one with the black garbage bag, and without a single shred of hesitation, he dropped it right in. The dull thud of the album hitting the potato peels and empty containers was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard in my entire life. 40 years of my life, of our life, buried in the garbage. Valerie, for the first time, looked up from her phone. She did not say a word. She just looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Was it pity? Indifference? I honestly do not know. "Well, it is getting late," Mark said, walking back into the dining room and wiping his hands on his pants as if he had just gotten rid of something dirty. "We have a meeting to get to. We will call you sometime this week, Mom." They gave me another rushed kiss, a cold brush against the cheek, and they left. I heard their hurried footsteps going down the stairs, the front door of the building slamming shut, and the engine of their brand new car starting up and driving away down the street. And then silence. A silence so thick, so heavy, that I felt like I was suffocating. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the dining room, staring at the kitchen door. The sun that had seemed so cheerful just an hour ago now felt cruel, shining a light on every single corner of my loneliness. The smell of the food, which used to be the scent of home, now just smelled like abandonment. The half-eaten chicken on their plates, the untouched dessert in the fridge, the cold coffee in the mugs. It was all a monument to my own stupidity, to my naive hope that someone out there still cared. I did not cry. My tears had completely dried up on the inside. It was a different kind of pain, a cold, hollow ache that settled right in the pit of my stomach. It was the absolute certainty that I had become totally invisible to my own son. I was not a person to him anymore. I was just an old piece of furniture. My memories were not treasures. They were just junk, taking up space. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, feeling like my feet weighed a ton each. I stopped in front of the trash can. The black bag was half open, revealing a corner of the leather spine of my album. It was stained with something. Probably coffee grounds from breakfast. A wave of nausea hit me. I leaned against the counter so I would not fall over. I looked out the window. Neighbors were walking by. Life was going on as usual. Nobody knew that, right inside my little kitchen, a murder had just been committed. They had completely destroyed 40 years of my history. I stayed like that for I do not know how long. Minutes, maybe an hour. Time had completely stopped making sense. It was just me and that black garbage bag. Suddenly the doorbell rang. The shock almost made me scream out loud. For one crazy second, I actually thought it was them, that they had come back to apologize to me. My heart did a stupid, hopeful little flip. I went to open the door, my pulse racing. But it was not Mark. It was Ray, the building superintendent, a young guy always wearing a tired but kind smile who lived with his family in the small apartment down on the ground floor. "Good afternoon, Miss Claire," he said, holding a stack of empty, heavy-duty trash bags. "I am here to collect the garbage." Panic shot straight up my throat. "No," I said, using a voice that did not even sound like my own. "Not today, Ray. Thank you." He looked at me, thoroughly confused. I was always the first one to put out the trash, keeping everything neat and tidy. He must have seen my face. He saw how pale I was, how wide my eyes were. His polite smile quickly shifted into an expression of genuine concern. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Are you feeling okay?" His simple question, his tone of pure respect, was the thing that finally broke me. I just nodded my head, completely unable to speak. He did not push it. He just looked at me for another second and said, "All right, well, if you need absolutely anything, you just knock on my door, okay? Take good care of yourself, Miss Claire." I watched him turn around and head back down the stairs. A virtual stranger had shown more care for me in 30 seconds than my own son had in an entire afternoon. I closed the door slowly and slid the deadbolt into place. Then I walked right back to the kitchen. Ray's brief presence had snapped me right out of my paralysis. Now I was feeling something much more intense than pain. It was a dull, freezing rage that was starting to build up from the very bottom of my stomach. I stared at the garbage bag. It was no longer a coffin for my memories. It was an absolute insult. With a sudden burst of determination that I did not even know I possessed, I shoved my hands right into the trash can. I did not care about the dirt, the smell, or the dampness. My trembling fingers brushed against the worn leather. I grabbed it as tightly as I could and pulled it out of there. I held it in my arms like it was a wounded child. I walked over to the sink, turned on the faucet, and took a clean cloth. I began to wipe down the cover with infinite care. I wiped away the coffee stains, the breadcrumbs, the grime of the day. I dried it off with a dish towel and hugged it tightly against my chest. I carried it back to the dining room and placed it right in the center of the table, like a crown. I opened it up. The pictures were perfectly intact. Robert and I smiling in black and white, Mark riding on his little tricycle. The faces of my parents, who had passed away long ago. They were all looking right back at me from the pages. "Old trash," he had said. I sat down at the table. The sun was already starting to set, painting the room in a melancholic shade of orange. I looked at the photos, and then I looked down at my own hands, wrinkled and lined with the veins of old age. These hands had worked hard for an entire lifetime. They had cooked thousands of meals, sewn hundreds of hems, and glued every single one of those pictures into place. And they had carefully counted and sorted every last coin that Robert and I had gathered with so much patience over the years. I remembered the exact words my husband used to say. "They are going to take care of us when we get old." Mark knew absolutely nothing about the coin collection. To him, they were just a couple of old wooden boxes filled with junk, sitting in the back of a closet. He'd never shown the slightest bit of interest in them. An icy sense of calm suddenly washed over me. The rage transformed into absolute clarity. My son had not just thrown a photo album into the garbage. He had shown me the exact place I occupied in his life. I was a burden, something stuck in the past, something utterly disposable. I closed the album carefully. I took it into my bedroom and tucked it safely away in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, right under my clothes. Then I walked back to the dining room and stared at Mark's old bedroom, the room where he still kept boxes full of his teenage junk, his old soccer trophies, and stacks of college notes. Old trash, I thought to myself, and a bitter smile slowly formed on my face for the first time in hours. He had thrown away the map, but I still remembered exactly where the treasure was buried. The night was incredibly long. I tossed and turned in bed, the echo of my son's harsh words bouncing around inside my head. Old trash. Stop living in the past. Every single time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of that album falling right into the black garbage bag. It was never just a picture book. It was the physical proof that my life had meant something, that I had loved, and that I had been loved in return. And he had treated it like a piece of garbage. The pain from that afternoon had settled deep inside my bones, turning into a bitter chill that no blanket could ever warm up. But right beneath that freezing cold, something else was being born, a kind of hard, razor-sharp clarity. I realized that I could not change what he thought of me, but I could absolutely change what I was going to do about it. I got out of bed on Sunday before the sun even came up. The house was dead silent, but it was a quietness that no longer felt lonely. It felt expectant. I did not make any coffee. I did not turn on the radio. I walked straight to the hallway closet, the one that always smells like mothballs and locked away time. Right at the very back, buried underneath some old heavy blankets we no longer used, there they were. 2 incredibly heavy wooden boxes without a single label on them. The exact same boxes that Mark had seen 1,000 times in his life, without ever paying them the slightest bit of attention. To him, they were just background props in his aging mother's house. I dragged the heavy boxes out to the middle of the dining room. It took a lot of effort. They weighed far more than I had remembered. I dropped to my knees on the cold floor and lifted the lid off the first one. The smell of aged metal and velvet-lined fabric instantly filled the air. There they were, perfectly organized in their little compartments, lined with faded red fabric, hundreds of coins, silver, copper, some with a dull golden shine, each one resting in its own little slot, like sleeping jewels. They were ours, Robert's and mine. We had hunted for them, bargained for them, cleaned them, and categorized them together over nearly 40 years of quiet Sunday mornings. My fingers, a little clumsy from the arthritis, brushed against a large, heavy silver coin. I picked it up. It had the profile of a king that nobody even remembered anymore. I felt the cold metal resting against my skin. It was never just a coin. It was the memory of a rainy afternoon in the historic district when Robert and I took shelter under the awning of an antique shop, and he spotted it sitting in a tray full of cheap trinkets. We paid next to nothing for it. People just do not know what they have, Robert had told me that afternoon, his eyes gleaming with pure excitement. And then, looking right at me, he added, "These are going to take care of us, Claire. Whenever I am gone, they will be right here for you." At that exact moment, the decision finally cemented itself in my mind. It was no longer just a vague idea or a blind, simmering rage. It was a concrete plan. My son had taught me a very valuable lesson the day before. He had taught me that, for some people, the past holds absolutely zero value. Well, I was going to show him the exact value in dollars and cents that my past could really hold. My very first move was heading straight toward Mark's bedroom, or rather, the museum of his teenage years that I had kept perfectly intact out of pure sentimentality. I opened the door. The exact same poster of a football team that barely existed anymore was still taped to the wall with yellowing adhesive. Up on a shelf, his old high school tournament trophies were just sitting there, collecting dust. Inside the closet hung his clothes from back when he was skinny and actually had hair. And in the corner, Boxes upon boxes of college notes and heavy textbooks he had never bothered to open again. Old trash, I whispered to myself, and the phrase on my lips did not hurt anymore. It sounded like pure justice. I began my ritual, not with wild fury, but with a cold, methodical, almost surgical efficiency. I walked to the laundry room and grabbed the heavy-duty trash bags that Ray had left for me. I also brought in a few sturdy cardboard boxes I kept around for groceries, and I started completely emptying out the room, systematically. First, the trophies. Every single one, with its little engraved plaque, was wrapped up in newspaper and packed into a box. Next came the heavy books and the stacks of notes. I piled them all up and tied them together with thick twine. I took the clothes out of the closet, folded them with care, and packed them tightly into the large bags. I did not break anything. I did not throw a single thing away. I was simply erasing his lingering presence from my home, exactly the same way he had tried to completely erase mine. As I worked, my mind was perfectly clear. It was as if the physical act of packing up his past was actively clearing away the thick fog of my own pain. Every single object I boxed up was another heavy string being cut. I was not the one living in the past. He was the one who had left his entire history parked right inside my house, taking up the physical and mental space that I desperately needed to reclaim. The room, which for 30 years had been Mark's sanctuary, slowly transformed into nothing more than a simple, empty space. A completely blank canvas. My blank canvas. When I finally finished, about 3 hours later, the room was totally unrecognizable. Empty. Spotless. It smelled like fresh lavender cleaner instead of stale, trapped air. Right in the middle of the hardwood floor sat 3 large suitcases and several heavy cardboard boxes, all perfectly sealed and clearly labeled with his name. My back was aching, but my spirit felt incredibly light. For the first time in a very long while, I truly felt like a piece of my own home belonged to me again. Now came the second phase of my plan. I went straight back to the heavy coin boxes. Tucked between the wooden compartments, stored inside a small manila envelope, I found exactly what I was looking for. A vintage business card, slightly yellowed with deeply worn edges. Elias Silverman, rare coins and stamps, free appraisals, and an old landline phone number printed right on the front. Mr. Silverman was an old acquaintance of Robert's. He was a very serious man, someone who spoke very few words, but he carried an absolutely flawless reputation within the tight-knit collector community. I had not seen him in years, well before Robert even got sick. I prayed that the phone number was still active. I walked over to the rotary phone in the dining room and dialed the numbers with a shaking finger. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was about to hang up, a deep, raspy voice finally answered the line. "Hello? Am I speaking with Mr. Elias Silverman?" I asked, my heart practically in my throat. There was a brief silence on the other end. "Speaking," the voice replied, laced with a hint of suspicion. "Mr. Silverman, my name is Claire. I am the widow of Robert Parker." Another heavy silence followed, but this time, it felt entirely different. I could almost sense the man on the other end digging through his old memories. "Claire?" he finally said, his rough voice softening just a bit. "Of course I remember. I am so terribly sorry about Robert. He was a truly great man, a genuine expert in the field." A tight knot formed right in my throat. "Thank you, Elias. He really was." I took a deep breath to steady myself. "I am bothering you for a specific reason. I need a full appraisal. It is the collection." "Robert's collection?" he asked, and I instantly noticed a sharp shift in his tone, a sudden, piercing professional interest. "I just assumed your son had taken it over." "My son?" I repeated, and a completely joyless smile crept onto my face. "My son is far too busy focusing on the future, Elias. He has absolutely zero interest in the past." Mr. Silverman did not say another word, but he understood absolutely everything. "I completely understand," he said simply. When would you like me to come by? Would today be possible? I know it is a Sunday, but it is incredibly important. For a treasure like Robert's, any given day is a good day. Give me your address. I will be there in 1 hour. While I waited, the phone started ringing again. This time, I recognized the number flashing on the little caller ID screen that Mark had bought for me on my last birthday. It was him. I let it ring several times before I finally picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, using the most neutral tone of voice I could possibly muster. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" he said, pushing that fake upbeat cheerfulness he always used whenever he felt a tiny bit of guilt. "I was just calling to check up on you. You seemed a little weird yesterday." "I am perfectly fine, Mark, just busy." "Busy on a Sunday?" He laughed. "What are you doing dusting off old picture frames?" The sheer irony of his comment almost made me burst into laughter. "Something like that," I replied smoothly. "I am just sorting through some old things." "Oh, well, anyway," he went on. "Valerie and I were thinking, maybe next week we can swing by, pick you up, and take you out to that brand new shopping mall they just built, just to get your mind off things, you know? You really need to get out of the house. See some modern people for a change." Modern people? As if I were just some dusty relic sitting in a museum. "I really appreciate the offer, Mark, but that is not going to be possible. I am going to be extremely tied up this week." "Tied up with what, Mom? Seriously? Please do not tell me you are going down to the senior center to play bingo. I have some very important paperwork to handle," I told him sharply. "We will have to talk another time. Right now, I am expecting a visitor." "A visitor? Who on earth is coming to see you on a Sunday?" The blatant curiosity in his voice was honestly bordering on offensive. "An old friend of your father's," I answered smoothly. And right before he could fire off any more questions, I added, "I have to let you go, Mark. Goodbye." And I hung up the phone. Hanging up the phone on my own son felt strangely liberating. It was a very small gesture, but it was just the very first of many to come. The doorbell rang exactly 1 hour later. It was Mr. Silverman. He was a short, balding man wearing thick glasses that made his eyes look enormous. He was carrying a heavy black leather briefcase that looked like it weighed almost as much as he did. I welcomed him in and led him straight into the dining room. When he saw the 2 large wooden boxes sitting wide open on the table, his eyes instantly lit up behind his thick lenses. He did not say a single word. He took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and carefully pulled a jeweler's loop and a pair of pristine white cotton gloves out of his briefcase. For the next 2 solid hours, the only sound in the dining room was the soft, rhythmic clinking of the coins being moved, the gentle scrape of metal against velvet, and Mr. Silverman's quiet little murmurs of sheer admiration. Incredible. I just cannot believe it. Robert had an absolute one-of-a-kind eye for this. I just sat quietly in my chair and watched him work. Every single coin he examined triggered a vivid memory in my mind. He saw a piece of rare history, a steep catalog value. I saw Robert's face smiling brightly under the sun at the flea market. I saw our hands intertwined over a small cafe table as we proudly admired our newest find. Finally, Mr. Silverman pulled off his white gloves and removed his loop. He leaned back in his chair and looked right at me. His face was a total mixture of raw shock and deep respect. "Claire," he said, his voice incredibly grave. "I always knew Robert had put together a good collection. But this is not just a good collection. This is a master's life work. There are pieces in these boxes that are extremely rare. Some of them are practically the only ones of their kind left in the entire country." My heart started pounding even harder in my chest. "And what exactly does that mean, Elias, in terms of money?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small notepad and a calculator. He crunched numbers for several long minutes, in total silence. I waited patiently, practically holding my breath. When he finally looked up, his expression was completely solemn. If we sell this the right way without rushing, targeting the proper high-end collectors—" He took a long, dramatic pause. "Claire, you are sitting on an absolute fortune, serious wealth. It is more than enough to buy this entire apartment building outright, and maybe even the one right next door, too." The air was knocked completely out of my lungs. I always knew they were worth something. Robert had told me that 1,000 times. But never, not even in my wildest, most far-fetched dreams, had I imagined something of this sheer magnitude. I looked down at the coins. They were no longer just sweet memories. They were raw power. They were absolute freedom. They were my entire future. A future that Mark had completely despised and thrown directly into the garbage. "I want to sell," I said, and my voice came out perfectly firm without a single trace of doubt. "Not all of it, though. I want to keep a few of them, the very first ones Robert and I ever bought together. But the rest of it, I want it all sold." Mr. Silverman nodded his head very slowly. "It is your decision, and I must say, it is the correct one. A historical treasure like this cannot just sit hidden away inside a dark box forever. I will take care of absolutely everything, with total discretion, of course." He left about an hour later, taking the very first box loaded with the most incredibly valuable pieces. He left me a handwritten receipt torn right out of his notepad. I did not need anything more than that. I trusted him completely. I trusted my late husband's dear friend. When he finally walked out the door, the house fell completely silent once again. But this time, it was a silence filled with absolute power. The late afternoon sun poured right through the window, shining perfectly onto the empty space where the photo album used to sit. Now, right in the center of the dining room, there was only the second box of coins, my personal box, and Mark's 3 large suitcases sitting by the front door, just waiting. I walked over to the front entrance and lined the heavy suitcases right up against the threshold, completely blocking the pathway. 1, 2, 3. Right next to them, I neatly stacked the cardboard boxes filled with the rest of his old trash. It was a literal barricade. It was a definitive period at the end of a long sentence. He had carelessly thrown my entire past into the garbage. I was simply returning his right back to him. On Monday morning, I woke up with a feeling I had not truly felt since Robert was still alive. The powerful feeling of having a real purpose. The sun was shining through the exact same window, but it no longer felt overly cheerful or bitterly cruel. It was simply the bright light of a brand new day. A day meant for getting to work. I did not rush myself at all. I brewed a nice cup of lemon tea, sat down at the dining room table, and stared at Mark's suitcases, still standing by the door like silent guards protecting my brand new life. They did not make me feel angry or sad anymore. They were just a simple logistical problem that I needed to clear out of the way. My very first phone call was not to Elias. It was to the local directory. I looked up the number for my longtime physician, Dr. Adams. His clinic was not far away at all, and I knew for a fact that on Monday mornings, he took walk-in patients on a first-come, first-served basis. I knew exactly how this was going to play out. I knew my son. His first attack was never going to be face-to-face. He would strike me right in the back. He would try his hardest to convince me and the rest of the world that I was losing my mind, that a 71-year-old widow had just suddenly snapped and gone completely crazy. He was going to weaponize my old age, my widowhood, and my loneliness right against me. And I was absolutely not going to let that happen. Right before leaving the apartment, I did something I had not done in years. I opened my closet and carefully picked out exactly what to wear. I did not just grab the very first old wool cardigan I could find. I chose a sharp navy blue skirt and jacket suit that I had worn to a niece's wedding nearly 10 years ago. It fit me a little loosely now, but it still looked incredibly elegant. I put on a pair of sheer pantyhose and some low-heeled shoes that pinched my bunions just a bit. and I brushed my hair with extreme care, pulling it back into a very tight bun at the nape of my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was definitely not the frail, homebound little old lady my son so deeply despised. She was Mrs. Claire Parker, and Mrs. Parker was going straight to war. Dr. Adams's clinic smelled heavily of rubbing alcohol and that crinkly paper they always roll over the exam tables. I had to sit and wait for almost an hour, completely surrounded by exhausted mothers with sniffling toddlers and other retirees, just waiting to get their prescriptions refilled. When they finally called my name, Dr. Adams greeted me with his usual warm smile. He was a truly good man who had treated me, Robert, and Mark ever since Mark was just a tiny baby. "Claire, it is so wonderful to see you. What brings you in today? I certainly hope it is nothing too serious," he said, taking a seat behind his heavy dark wood desk. "No, Michael, it is nothing serious at all. Quite the opposite, actually," I replied, and my voice sounded far steadier than I even expected. "I came to ask you for a favor. I need a full, comprehensive checkup, but not just for my blood pressure and cholesterol levels. I need a complete cognitive exam, a thorough one. I want you to run every single test for memory, lucidity, and general judgment, and I need you to put it all in writing. An official medical certificate, complete with your signature and your medical license number, clearly stating that I am in full and absolute control of my mental faculties." Dr. Adams slowly took off his glasses and looked at me, completely taken aback. "A certified document? Claire? Did something happen? Is somebody bothering you?" I took a very deep breath. "My son, Michael. My son seems to think that just because I am 71 years old and I enjoy looking at old pictures, I am suddenly ready to be locked away in a home. And before he tries to pull any stupid legal stunts, I want to have a solid piece of paper proving that the only person around here who has completely lost their mind is certainly not me." He did not ask any more questions. I imagine in his line of work, he had seen stories just like mine 1,000 times over. He nodded slowly, a very serious expression settling on his face. "I understand perfectly, Claire. Absolutely. Let us get started right away." I spent the next hour and a half answering countless questions, repeating long sequences of numbers backwards, drawing clock faces, and memorizing random lists of words. It was completely exhausting, but with every single correct answer, I could literally feel myself building a massive wall, brick by heavy brick, right around my own mind. A fortified wall that Mark was never going to be able to tear down. When it was all over, Dr. Adams signed and stamped an official document. He handed it over to me using both hands. "Here you go, Claire. You are far more lucid than half the 30-year-olds I know. If anyone ever tries to claim otherwise, they are either a flat-out liar or they have extremely malicious intentions." I tucked that paper away in my purse like it was a priceless treasure. It was my heavy shield, my absolute armor. Now I was finally ready for the next phase. On my way back home, I stopped by a local locksmith. I explained to the locksmith that I had unfortunately lost my keys, and just for safety, I wanted to completely replace the lock on my front door. Half an hour later, I had a brand new heavy-duty deadbolt installed and a shiny set of keys that absolutely no one else possessed but me. The solid click of the new deadbolt sliding perfectly into the doorframe was like beautiful music to my ears. It was the distinct sound of total security. It was the sound of my home finally becoming my fortress once again. Mark's call came later that exact same afternoon, exactly like I knew it would. The phone started ringing, and his name flashed brightly on the little screen. I just let it ring until it went straight to voicemail. 5 minutes later, he called back again. This time I picked up. "Hello," I said. "Mom, I have been calling you. Why did you not answer? Are you okay?" His voice sounded so completely, falsely worried. "I was a little tied up, Mark. What do you need?" The sudden chill in my tone completely threw him off balance. "What do you mean? What do I need? I'm calling to see how you are doing. You just seemed a little off yesterday." "I am perfectly fine. Was that all?" There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to process my freezing tone. Well, yeah. Listen, Mom, I was thinking about what happened yesterday. Maybe I was just a little bit harsh with the whole photo album thing. It is just that I really worry about you getting completely stuck in the past. Do you understand? I only did it for your own good. The lie was so incredibly blatant that I almost laughed out loud. I understand you perfectly, Mark. Thank you so much for your deep concern. Now, if you will excuse me, I am just about to sit down and eat my lunch. Wait, hold on, Mom. Do not hang up yet. I wanted to swing by tonight to grab some of my old football jerseys I left in my room. I need them for a tournament with the guys from work. And there it was. The real reason for his phone call. It was never out of concern. It was just pure convenience. That is not going to be possible, Mark, I said, maintaining my absolute calm. What do you mean it is not going to be possible? It will take 1 minute. I will walk in, grab them, and get right out. They are not in your room anymore. What? Where did you put them? They are packed in some suitcases, sitting right by the front door. Another silence. This one lasted much longer. A silence heavily loaded with pure disbelief and tightly contained rage. What exactly did you do, Mom? I did exactly what you advised me to do. I finally stopped living in the past, and I completely removed yours from my house. You can come by and pick up your things whenever you like. Just leave me a message before you head over, and I will bring them straight down to the lobby for you. There is absolutely no need for you to come upstairs. Are you completely crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? I am heading over there right now. And he hung up on me. I knew he would come, and I knew he was not going to come alone. Valerie would be right there with him, either to act as his witness or to try and manipulate me with her sickly, fake sweetness. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one right by the big window, and I waited. I was not afraid. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control. They arrived exactly 40 minutes later. The intercom buzzed with a sudden violence that made me jump. I did not answer it. A few seconds later, the heavy pounding on my front door started. Loud, relentless. "Mom, open the door. I know you are in there. Stop messing around." Mark's angry voice echoed loudly down the hallway. I stood up with total calm and looked straight through the peephole. They were both there. Him, his face flushed bright red with sheer fury. Her standing one step behind him, staring down at her phone just like always, but wearing a deep look of pure annoyance. The pounding grew even louder. "Mom, I swear to God, if you do not open this door, I'm going to kick it down." That was right when the door to the apartment across the hall suddenly swung open. It was Ray, the superintendent. He had thrown on a clean t-shirt, and his face, which was usually smiling, was dead serious. "Sir, is there a problem here?" he asked Mark. "You are making an awful lot of noise. The other neighbors are going to start complaining." "Mind your own business, kid. This is my mother's house," Mark yelled, completely beside himself. "That is exactly why I am making it my business," Ray replied. He did not raise his voice, but he spoke with a fierce firmness that honestly surprised me. "Miss Claire is a very good woman. There is absolutely no reason for you to be screaming at her door like a maniac." That was my cue. With the greatest peace of mind in the entire world, I slid back the chain, turned the brand new deadbolt twice, and finally opened the door. I did not open it all the way, just enough for them to see me. I stood right in the doorway wearing my navy blue suit and my hair pulled back into a flawless bun. Mark was completely speechless when he saw me. He had expected to find his mother looking disheveled, crying in her bathrobe. Not this woman. "Good afternoon, Mark, Valerie," I said, with a perfectly calm voice. "You came to get your things, right?" He just stood there staring at me, not knowing what to say. His fury completely deflated when faced with my absolute calm. I nodded toward the 3 suitcases and the boxes stacked up in my living room right behind me. "There is everything. Please take it all away. It is blocking the hallway." He swallowed hard. "Mom, What is all this? Is this some kind of joke? No, Mark, it is not a joke. It is a move. Yours. Valerie put her phone in her pocket and stepped forward. Claire, please. There is no need to make a scene. Mark is just a little stressed, but… The only person making a scene here is your husband, Valerie, I interrupted her, looking straight into her eyes. I am perfectly calm. I am simply asking him to remove his personal belongings from my property. The word property seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Your property? This is my house too. I grew up here. You grew up here, I nodded. But you do not live here anymore. Now please take your things. Ray needs to clean the hallway. The mere mention of Ray, who was still standing right there acting as a silent witness to the entire scene, was the final straw. The public humiliation completely blinded him. You are not going to kick me out of my own house, you crazy old lady, he screamed, and he took a sudden step forward as if he were going to force his way inside. But I was totally prepared. I took one step back and started closing the door. He stuck his foot in the jamb to block it. Do not you dare shut the door in my face. Mark, I said, my voice as cold as solid ice, take your foot out of my door right now, or I am calling the police. My threat stopped him dead in his tracks. The word police, spoken with such absolute certainty, completely paralyzed him. He knew I was more than capable of doing it. He pulled his foot out and took a step back. His face was a twisted mask of pure hatred and disbelief. I just cannot believe this, he hissed. After absolutely everything I have done for you? Everything you have done for me? I repeated, and for the very first time, a sliver of emotion leaked into my voice, a bitter irony. You mean like throwing my entire life into the garbage? Please, Mark, take your things right now. Valerie, seeing that the situation was slipping entirely out of her control, grabbed him by the arm. Mark, that's enough. Let us just go. We will take the stuff and we can talk about this later, when things cool down. He yanked his arm out of her grip. No, I am not going anywhere. This is my father's house. Your father passed away, Mark, I reminded him, without a single ounce of pity. And this house belongs to me. The deed is strictly in my name. Now, for the very last time, take your suitcases and leave. He completely ran out of arguments. He was utterly defeated. He looked at the suitcases, then at me, and then over at Ray, who was still watching in total silence. With a low grunt of pure rage, he bent down and grabbed the largest suitcase. This is not over, Mom. I swear to you, you have absolutely no idea who you just messed with. On the contrary, Mark, I replied, as he and Valerie started dragging the heavy boxes and suitcases toward the elevator. I think for the very first time in your life, you are finally starting to figure it out. I closed the door before they could say another word. I turned the key, slid the chain into place, and leaned my back heavily against the wood. My heart was beating totally out of control. My hands were shaking, but it was not from fear. It was the pure adrenaline of a battle successfully won. I listened to the elevator arrive, the heavy doors opening and then closing shut, and then, once again, total silence. But this time, it was a completely victorious silence. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of water. My hands were still trembling just a bit. I looked out the window and saw them down below, right on the sidewalk, struggling to shove all those boxes into the trunk of their expensive brand new car. They looked so incredibly small, completely ridiculous. The phone started ringing again. It was him. I knew this was the real counterattack. I picked up the receiver. You listen to me very closely, you crazy old witch, he snapped, skipping any kind of greeting. His voice was a poisonous whisper. You think you are so incredibly smart, do you not? Throwing my stuff out, changing the locks. Well, we are going to settle this somewhere else. I am calling my lawyer. That apartment is mine by right, too. I am your one and only heir. I let him finish his screaming. When he finally took a pause to catch his breath, I spoke. An inheritance is collected when a person actually dies, Mark, and I, as you can clearly see, am very much alive. We will see about that, he yelled. I am going to have you declared legally insane, Mom. Did you hear me? Insane. I am going to find a judge who will officially say you have completely lost your mind. They are going to lock you up in a nursing home. I promise you that. And I am going to take over the administration of your entire estate, starting with that crappy apartment and ending with Dad's pension. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing. You are going to die totally alone in a nursing home. Do you understand me? The heavy, cruel threat just hung in the air. It was exactly what I had anticipated. The final blow. The ultimate card he thought would grant him a definitive victory. I, however, simply remained silent for a long moment. I let him savor his supposed win. I could perfectly picture his triumphant smirk on the other end of the line. How incredibly curious that you would bring that up, Mark, I finally replied, using the sweetest, calmest tone I could possibly find. Because just this very morning, I actually paid a little visit to Dr. Adams's clinic. The pause I left hanging on the phone line was brief. Just a few short seconds, but within them, I contained an entire lifetime of patience. On the other side, Mark's total silence was completely filled with an arrogant confidence. He was so incredibly sure he had me backed into a corner. And he gave me a complete comprehensive checkup, I continued in that same honeyed voice, physical and mental. And it turns out I have the blood pressure of a 50-year-old woman and the memory of an absolute elephant. I have an official certificate, Mark, properly signed and stamped by a licensed medical professional, clearly stating that I am in full and absolute control of all my mental faculties. It says, word for word, that my judgment is absolutely excellent. Is that not just wonderful? If you would like, I could always ask Ray to run a photocopy down to you. The silence on the other end of the line instantly shifted. It was not arrogant anymore. It was the dense, incredibly heavy silence of an engine that had just blown out. I heard a sharp, ragged breath, a strange guttural noise like he was choking on his own rage. No, he stammered. That does not prove a single thing. Any paid-off doctor will sign anything. Dr. Adams? I asked with completely fake innocence. The same doctor who treated your chicken pox and stitched up your forehead when you fell off your bike. The exact same man who took care of your father right up until his very last day? I highly doubt a judge is going to view him as a paid-off doctor, Mark. In fact, I genuinely believe his expert medical testimony might hold just a tiny bit more weight than the word of a son who was just kicked out of his mother's house for showing her profound disrespect. This is war, Mom. Do you hear me? This is absolute war, he screamed, but his voice had lost all of its real power. It was the desperate bark of a frightened dog, not a wolf. I am going to find another doctor. I am going to... Do whatever you feel you need to do, Mark, I interrupted him, and my voice turned completely cold as steel once again. But while you are busy looking for new doctors and lawyers, I highly suggest you also find a very good place to store your junk, because it is not staying in my house, and the very next time you come banging on my front door like that, you are going to be having a nice conversation with the police officers down at the 12th precinct. Am I completely clear? I did not even wait for his answer. I hung up the phone with incredibly deliberate gentleness. I stood there for a brief moment just staring down at the device, my old rotary phone. It was an object from the past, sure, but it had just become the very weapon I used to win this first major battle. The war, exactly as he called it, was only just beginning, and I was more than ready. Over the next 2 days, I did not hear a single word from him. The silence was an absolute blessing. I used that precious time to start dismantling the rest of the past that simply did not serve me anymore. I deeply scrubbed the room that used to belong to Mark, which now smelled strictly of lavender and brand new beginnings. I took down the old, heavy curtains and let the bright sun completely fill the space. I decided it was going to be my sewing room, my own personal workshop, a bright place designed for creating things, not for storing someone else's discarded memories. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was out watering the geraniums on the balcony, the phone started ringing. It was Valerie. Her voice was incredibly sweet, like thick syrup. "Claire? Hi, honey. How are you doing?" "I am doing just fine, Valerie. Thank you for asking." "Oh, that is so wonderful to hear. I was just so worried about you. Look, Claire, I am calling because Mark is... well, he is just completely destroyed. He is not eating. He's not sleeping at all. He is incredibly remorseful about the way he treated you. Sometimes he just gets a little carried away. You know how he is. He is just very passionate. But he really loves you, Claire. You are his mother." I listened to her completely rehearsed little speech without interrupting once. I could perfectly picture her sitting on her expensive designer sofa, with her freshly painted nails, literally reading straight from a script they had written together. "He wants to apologize to you," she kept going. "He wants the three of us to get together for coffee, just to talk things out like a real family, a completely clean slate. How about we swing by your place tomorrow afternoon?" "No, Valerie, that does not work for me." The extremely direct answer completely threw her off. There was a long pause. "Excuse me, what do you mean, no?" "Claire, he is your son. And exactly because he is my son, he knows perfectly well where to find me if he truly wants to talk. But it is not going to be inside my house, and it is certainly not going to be with an audience," I said, directly referring to her. "If Mark needs to say something to me, he can do it through a lawyer, or he can write me a letter. Right now, I do not want to see him. I need some time." "But Claire, a lawyer? That is absolutely ridiculous. We are a family." Family does not throw a lifetime of memories into the garbage, Valerie. And family certainly does not threaten to lock their own mother away in a nursing home. This conversation is over. Please do not call me again. I hung up the phone once more. This time, it felt even better. I was finally drawing boundaries, establishing borders that had been completely blurred for decades. My home was my own country, and I was the one who decided exactly who was allowed to cross the border. The real big move, however, was already brewing somewhere else. On Friday morning, I received a call from Mr. Silverman. "Claire, good morning. I have some updates for you," he said in his highly professional voice. "I have already reached out to two of the most serious collectors in the city. They looked at the photographs of the pieces, and they are, how should I put this, absolutely desperate to see them in person. One of them actually lives in Europe, and he is flying out here next week solely for this. The private auction is going to be a massive success." "That is wonderful news, Elias. Thank you so much." "There is just one small issue, or rather, a minor formality," he went on. "In order to properly transfer the ownership titles for the most valuable pieces, I need you to sign a few legal papers. I am also going to need a copy of Robert's will, or the official declaration of heirs, just to formally establish that you are the sole legal owner of the entire collection." "Of course, the usual bureaucracy. Absolutely, Elias. I have all of those documents safely stored away. When should we meet?" "I will propose something even better," he said. "My office is right downtown. Why do not you come by tomorrow morning? I will treat you to a nice cup of coffee. We can sign everything in total peace, and I can actually show you the place where your treasure is going to begin its brand new life." I really liked the idea. Getting out of my neighborhood, going back downtown to the historic district where it had all started. It felt like I was finally closing a long circle. On Saturday morning, I put on my navy blue suit once again. It had officially become my suit of armor. I took a cab straight downtown. The historic neighborhood was totally bustling, packed with tourists and the familiar sounds of the weekend flea market getting set up. Mr. Silverman's office was not a simple storefront on the street. It was on the second floor of a beautiful old building with a heavy wooden door and a small bronze plaque that simply read, "Silverman." The inside of the place was absolutely incredible. It smelled like old paper, rich leather, and pure history. The walls were completely covered with massive bookshelves, packed with heavy volumes on rare coins. Inside elegant glass display cases, under very soft lighting, coins and historical medals were displayed looking like they were floating in thin air. It was a true sanctuary, a place demanding profound respect. Mr. Silverman poured me a cup of coffee in a delicate porcelain cup and carefully explained all the legal documents. I read through them with intense focus. They were standard consignment contracts, extremely clear and precise. As I was signing the last page, he looked at me with his wise eyes from behind his thick glasses. "Your son called," he said, totally cutting to the chase. I looked up from the papers. My hand stopped moving completely. "How on earth did he get your phone number?" "He tracked me down. He told me he was the son of Robert Parker and that he desperately wanted to speak to me regarding his father's collection." I felt a sudden sharp pang of cold in my chest. "And what exactly did you tell him?" I told him that, yes, I was indeed handling the private sale of a collection that once belonged to his father, and that it was now your absolute exclusive property. I carefully explained that I could not provide him with any further details due to strict client confidentiality, meaning you. And how did he react? Mr. Silverman let out a dry little chuckle. Exactly like a spoiled child who just had a toy snatched away, a toy he did not even know he owned. He was absolutely furious. He demanded to know exactly what kind of money we were talking about. He started ranting about his legal rights, his rightful inheritance, and how he was the only male heir. I simply informed him that any legal claims needed to be submitted through the proper legal channels, and I hung up the phone on him. So, that was his brand new strategy. I was no longer the crazy old lady. Now I was the helpless, fragile widow being robbed of the family estate by some shady stranger. I rubbed my temples in frustration. I was so incredibly tired of all his manipulative games. "Thank you for handling it that way, Elias. Do not worry about it at all. I am more than accustomed to dealing with incredibly greedy heirs. But Claire, you need to understand, he is going to keep pushing. And once he finally discovers the true financial value of this collection, he is going to get much worse, far worse." He was absolutely right. Mark was never going to just give up, not now that he had caught the distinct scent of real money. And right then, while I was staring at those illuminated glass cases completely filled with treasures, a sudden idea came to me. A permanent way to end this nonsense once and for all. "Elias," I said, "I need you to do one more thing for me. I want you to call Mark, and I want you to summon him right here to your office. Tell him that his mother has officially authorized a formal meeting to discuss the future of the family estate. Use those exact words. Tell him to be here on Monday at exactly 5 in the afternoon, and tell him he must come completely alone." Mr. Silverman looked at me, slowly raising one eyebrow. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Claire? Do you really want to confront him?" "No," I replied, and a cold smile slowly spread across my face. "I do not want to confront him. I want to utterly crush him." On Monday, at 4:30 in the afternoon, I was already sitting inside Mr. Silverman's office. He had set up a comfortable leather armchair for me in a dark corner of the room, positioned perfectly so I could see the front door without being immediately spotted by anyone walking in. Right on top of the massive oak desk that dominated the room, Mr. Silverman had purposely placed just 3 single coins from the collection. They were not the most valuable pieces we had, but they were 3 incredibly large, visually stunning silver coins, each one resting inside its own plush, velvet display case. At exactly 5 o'clock, the buzzer rang. My heart skipped a beat, but I took a very deep breath and clung tightly to the cold calmness I had been cultivating all week long. Mr. Silverman went over to open the door. I heard Mark's voice sounding incredibly tense and totally suspicious. "I am Mark Parker. I have a scheduled meeting with Mr. Silverman." "Come right in, Mr. Parker. We've been expecting you," Elias said, with an absolutely glacial formality. Mark walked into the office. He stopped dead in his tracks, looking around the room with a strange mixture of awe and pure disdain. He was wearing an expensive suit that fit him just a little bit too tight, as if he were desperately trying to project an importance he simply did not possess. His gaze swept over the illuminated display cases, across the massive walls of books, and finally locked right onto the 3 silver coins shining brightly on the desk. "So this is the famous collection," he said, stepping closer to the table. He had not spotted me yet. "This is just a very small sample, yes," Mr. Silverman replied, standing perfectly still next to his desk. Mark leaned in to look closer at the coins, but he did not dare reach out to touch them. "So, how much is this old junk actually worth? My dad always claimed they were worth something. I am guessing it is enough to pay off a few lingering debts, right?" His tone was that of a man trying desperately to sound casual while being completely eaten alive by pure greed. That was when I finally stepped out of the shadows. "Well, that totally depends on exactly which debts you are trying to pay off, Mark," I said. He jumped and spun around, looking exactly like he had just seen a ghost. The color drained from his face, going from flush red to completely pale in a single second. He stared at me, then over at Mr. Silverman, and then right back at me. The trap had officially slammed shut on him. What are you doing here?" he stammered out. "The meeting was supposed to be just with me." "The meeting is with me, Mark. The estate fully belongs to me," I replied, walking slowly toward the desk. I stood directly across from him on the other side of the polished wood. "But seeing as you seem so deeply invested in the family estate, I decided it was high time you finally got a crystal clear idea of exactly what you despised your entire life." His face hardened instantly. The initial shock gave way to his usual tired arrogance. "Oh, I get it now. You dragged me all the way down here just to rub it in my face that you are selling the old man's little coins. Well, great job, Mom. Congratulations. How much are they going to give you for them? $20,000? $30,000? That is more than enough to buy yourself a whole bunch of knitting yarn, is it not?" He crossed his arms tightly, smiling with pure smugness. He truly thought he understood the game being played. He assumed the final number was something he could easily brush off, an amount that still left him standing in a position of complete superiority. I looked over at Mr. Silverman. He gave me a very slight nod. We had perfectly rehearsed this exact moment. "Mr. Parker," Elias began, using his deepest, most authoritative appraiser voice, "you are severely underestimating the sheer knowledge and intense passion of your late father, as well as the actual market value of this collection. The 3 pieces resting directly in front of you, for instance, carry a combined market value of approximately $40,000. Mark's jaw practically hit the floor. His smug smile vanished instantly. He leaned back over the coins, staring at them like he was seeing them for the very first time. $40,000 just for 3 old pieces of metal? And those are not even remotely close to being the most important pieces in the set," Mr. Silverman continued, absolutely relentless. He opened a drawer in his heavy desk and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. He laid it open on the table. It contained incredibly high-quality, glossy photographs of several other coins from our collection. This one right here, one of the earliest silver pieces minted in the Americas, is practically one of a kind. Its starting bid at a major international auction would not fall below $200,000. And this other piece, an experimental gold strike from 1881, could easily fetch upwards of $500,000. Mark stared at the glossy photos, and then he looked up at me, his eyes practically bulging out of his head. He just could not process the information. The air inside the room seemed to suddenly grow incredibly thick. He swallowed hard. The sound echoed clearly in the absolute silence. "Mr. Silverman has just completed a highly conservative appraisal of the entire lot, Mark," I told him in a very quiet voice. Do you want to know the final number? The total calculated value of that old trash your father and I scraped together over 40 years and kept sitting at the bottom of a closet? He was completely unable to form a response. He simply nodded, a barely noticeable movement of his head. Mr. Silverman cleared his throat. He looked down at a single sheet of paper resting on his desk. Taking into account the individual auction value of the key highlight pieces, as well as the comprehensive value of the full set, the entire collection carries an estimated market value. He took a perfectly timed dramatic pause. Somewhere between $4 and $5 million. The astronomical number dropped into the total silence of the office like a massive boulder crashing into a quiet lake. Mark stumbled backward. Literally. He had to grab the edge of the desk just to keep himself from completely falling over. His face had been drained of every last ounce of color. He looked like he was going to throw up right there on the rug. $4-5 million. The sound of his breathing was ragged, a heavy whistling wheeze. "No," he whispered. "That cannot be real. That is completely impossible." "It is incredibly possible," I said, displaying a deep calm that honestly surprised even myself. "It is the direct result of an entire lifetime of study, patience, and true love, concepts you have never been able to comprehend." He just stood there staring blankly into space for a very long time. His mind, entirely accustomed to scraping by on bank loans and monthly paychecks, simply could not process a number that massive. And then, his sheer denial rapidly twisted into rage, a truly desperate kind of rage, the frantic anger of a totally cornered animal. He pointed a shaking finger straight at my face. "This belongs to Dad. Half of all that money belongs to me. It is my rightful inheritance. You cannot sell a single piece of it without my permission. I am going to hit you with a massive lawsuit you will never forget for the rest of your life, you thieving old woman." It was his absolute last card to play, the final desperate threat. But I was totally prepared for that one too. Slowly, I opened my purse. The exact same purse where I had safely stored away the medical certificate from Dr. Adams. I pulled out a heavy manila envelope, slightly yellowed with age. I placed it gently right on the desk, exactly halfway between him and me. "Your father always knew you were like this, Mark," I said, a deep, genuine sadness seeping into my voice. "He truly loved you, but the man was certainly not blind. He always knew that your endless ambition often completely overpowered your own heart." I slid the envelope right across the smooth wood toward him. "Open it." With trembling, incredibly clumsy hands, he managed to pry it open. Inside was a single solitary sheet of paper, neatly folded into quarters. It was a formal letter, written out in Robert's perfectly neat, slightly slanted handwriting, and it had been legally notarized. Mark read it out loud, speaking in a completely broken whisper. "I hereby officially certify that the entire numismatic collection acquired throughout my lifetime, alongside my wife, Claire Parker, is her sole and exclusive personal property. This has always been a joint project. However, the capital invested was always sourced from our shared funds, and the knowledge required was equally shared between us. In the specific event of my passing, it is my explicit and absolute will that she dispose of this collection in whichever way she deems appropriate, strictly to ensure her ongoing comfort and total peace of mind. These coins belong entirely to Claire, so she may never want for anything, and to ensure that absolutely no one, not even our own son, will ever be able to strip away the lasting peace she so deeply deserves." When he finished reading those words, the paper slipped right out of his trembling hands. He just stood there staring blankly at his father's signature and the heavy official notary stamp right next to it. It was completely irrefutable. It was the absolute end of the road. His own father, reaching out from beyond the grave, had just legally disinherited him from a massive treasure he never even knew existed. He finally looked up and stared right at me. For the very first time in his adult life, I did not see an ounce of rage or sheer arrogance in his eyes. I saw absolute total defeat, complete annihilation. He was utterly broken. "Mom," he choked out, and his voice was a desperate, pathetic plea. "Mom, please." But I was no longer the fragile mother he could easily manipulate. I held my ground perfectly. "It is completely over, Mark," I told him firmly. "The screaming, the threats, the constant disrespect, it is all completely over. Starting today, absolutely everything is going to be done my way. I am going to give you two distinct options, and I highly suggest you listen to me with extreme attention." I watched him completely crumble right in front of my eyes, right there inside Mr. Silverman's office, surrounded by the smell of history and pure justice. The thick arrogance simply drained out of his body like air hissing out of a punctured balloon. All that remained was the hollow shell of my son, a 40-year-old grown man who, for the very first time, looked exactly like a terrified little boy. His eyes, those exact same eyes that had looked at me with such immense annoyance and deep contempt, were now begging me for mercy. "The very first option is incredibly simple, Mark," I told him, and my clear voice completely filled the absolute silence of the room. I did not raise it one bit. I did not have to scream. True power never makes a loud noise. You can absolutely follow through on your little threat. You can hit me with a massive lawsuit. You can go out and hire a lawyer, and I will hire an entire team of mine. You will burn through thousands of dollars you do not even have in a vicious legal battle that will drag on for years. You will present your flimsy arguments, and I will simply present this notarized letter from your father, the official medical certificate from Dr. Adams, and the sworn statements from my neighbors regarding your public tantrums. And in the very end, after dragging your poor father's good name entirely through the mud, you will lose completely. And not only will you never see a single dime of this money, but the judge will order you to pay all the expensive legal fees. You will be left in total financial ruin, and I will never speak a single word to you for as long as I live. That is option number one, the all-out war you so desperately wanted. I let those heavy words truly settle in. He swallowed dryly. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He looked over at Mr. Silverman, who remained standing as perfectly still as a stone statue, and then he looked back at me. "Option number two," I continued smoothly, "is total peace. You walk out of here, right this second. You fully accept the fact that this entire collection, this massive estate, belongs strictly to me. Mine to administer, mine to sell, mine to fully enjoy, or completely mine to drag out to the town square and burn to ashes if I feel like it. You disappear from my life for a long while. No more phone calls, absolutely no visits, and no more pathetic little messages delivered through Valerie. You will take this time away to sit and truly think about the kind of man you have actually become. And maybe, just maybe, if one day you can actually prove through your real actions that you have changed, that you finally understand the true value of the things that do not have a price tag attached, maybe then we can actually speak again, not about money, about genuine respect, as a mother and a son. That is option number two." The absolute silence returned. He just stood there staring at me, his mouth hanging slightly open. His brain was spinning at top speed, desperately calculating, weighing his terrible odds. I could literally see the fierce struggle playing out right on his face, his blinding greed fighting a desperate battle against his basic instinct for survival. "And what exactly am I supposed to do now?" he whispered, his voice completely shattered. "Valerie and I, we have massive debts. The car payments, the mortgage on the apartment. We were counting on—" "That is not my problem in the slightest, Mark." I completely cut him off. "Your adult decisions carry very real adult consequences. You somehow learned how to spend money like a rich man. Now it is time for you to truly learn how to live like exactly what you are, just like your father and I always were. Hardworking people who just figure out how to get by with exactly what they have. He dragged both of his hands slowly down his face. He rubbed his eyes hard, looking exactly like a man desperately trying to wake up from a terrible nightmare. And then, he finally broke. He collapsed into the nearest chair, buried his face completely in his hands, and just started to cry. It was not the crying of genuine remorse. It was the incredibly bitter, totally desperate crying of absolute defeat, the pathetic sobbing of completely frustrated greed. I simply let him cry. Mr. Silverman and I just waited in perfect silence. There was absolutely nothing left to say. The pathetic sound of his heavy sobs was the fitting soundtrack of a lifetime of terrible decisions, finally handing him the ultimate bill. When he eventually managed to calm down, he lifted his face. It was totally red and completely swollen. He looked at least 10 years older. Option number 2, he managed to say with a suffocatingly thick voice. I choose option number 2. I nodded my head very slowly. An excellent choice, Mark. Now please get out of here. He slowly stood up, stumbling just a little bit. He did not even dare to look at me as he walked past. He dragged himself toward the front door like a totally broken machine. Mr. Silverman escorted him right to the exit. I heard the heavy wooden door softly click shut, and the absolute silence that remained in that room afterward was the cleanest, purest silence I had truly felt in a very long time. Exactly 6 months and 2 weeks quickly passed by. Time, when you reach my age, sometimes stretches out endlessly, and other times it completely shrinks. But those specific months carried a brand new rhythm, my very own rhythm. The apartment was totally transformed. Mark's old room was now officially my personal sewing studio. Instead of shelves filled with dust-covered sports trophies, there were hundreds of spools of thread in every single color imaginable, perfectly organized on a tall shelf that reached all the way up to the ceiling. Right where his old teenage bed used to sit, my trusty old Singer sewing machine now proudly stood. The exact same machine that had helped me pay off so many heavy bills over the years, now freshly oiled and running perfectly, just like in its very best days. The stale smell of closed windows and heavy mothballs had been entirely replaced by the wonderful scent of fresh, new fabrics and clean machine oil. I decided to sell a very small portion of the collection, just a handful of the rarest coins, straight through Elias. The incredible amount of money that hit my checking account was far more than I had ever seen in my entire life combined. But I did not lose my head. I simply did what any practical woman would do. First, I entirely paid to have the outside of our whole apartment building completely repainted. Ray organized the entire project, and the neighbors were so incredibly thrilled that they actually brought me a massive tray of fancy pastries just to show their profound thanks. After that, I finally had my kitchen completely remodeled. I had beautiful new tiles installed, shiny granite countertops, and a highly modern oven that actually cleaned itself. Every single time I walked into that kitchen, the exact same room where my son had carelessly thrown my entire life right into the garbage, I just smiled. It was officially my own personal palace now. My daily routine shifted completely. Twice a week, I happily attended a senior yoga class down the street. Every Tuesday, I met up to grab some tea with 2 dear childhood friends I had recently managed to reconnect with. And practically every single afternoon, I sat down and sewed. Not because I desperately needed the extra money anymore, but purely out of sheer pleasure. In fact, right in that very moment, I was putting the finishing touches on a cute little summer dress for Ray's young daughter. An adorable 5-year-old girl with the largest, most wonderfully curious eyes I had ever seen. As I carefully guided the pretty floral fabric right beneath the rapidly moving needle, I felt completely at peace. It was a beautiful, profound peace that I had earned the very hard way. I had not heard a single thing about Mark. He actually kept his strict word. The silence was absolute. Sometimes, late at night, I would randomly wonder what he was doing with his life, but the passing thought did not bring me any real pain. It was just a distant curiosity, sort of like reading a news article in the paper about someone you kind of knew a very long time ago. Then, one quiet Thursday afternoon, the downstairs intercom suddenly buzzed. I was not expecting any visitors at all. I picked up the receiver with a heavy dose of suspicion. "Hello? Mom? It is me, Mark." The voice. It was definitely his voice, but it sounded completely different. It was totally muted, entirely stripped of its usual sickening arrogance. I hesitated for just a brief second. "What exactly do you want, Mark? I clearly told you no." I know, he quickly interrupted me, and his voice sounded frantic, like he was absolutely terrified I was going to hang up on him. "I'm not asking you for anything, I just wanted to see if we could possibly talk. Just for 5 minutes. Over at the small park right across the street from the building, sitting on a bench. I will not try to come upstairs, I swear to you." Something hidden deep within his pathetic tone told me this was not another one of his traps. It was a total surrender. "All right," I told him. "I will be out there in 10 minutes. I threw on a light sweater, grabbed my shiny new keys, and headed straight downstairs. My heart was definitely beating a bit faster than normal. I carefully crossed the street and I spotted him. He was sitting heavily on a wooden bench, with his back turned to me, just staring blankly out at the empty playground equipment. He looked considerably thinner. The flashy, incredibly expensive suits had been entirely replaced by a pair of faded blue jeans and a worn-out jacket I had never even seen before. When I sat down right next to him, keeping a very safe distance between us, he literally jumped. He turned around to look at me. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes. His face looked incredibly exhausted, deeply lined with harsh wrinkles that certainly were not there just a few months ago. "Thank you for coming out, Mom. You clearly stated 5 minutes." He just nodded slowly. He looked down at his trembling hands, nervously fidgeting with his own fingers. "Valerie completely left me," he blurted out, getting right to the heavy point. "About 3 months ago, the exact second she realized there was not going to be a massive multi-million-dollar inheritance sitting in our near future, she simply got bored and walked out. She told me I was no longer the highly ambitious man she had originally married. She took the nice car and practically half of all our furniture. I did not say a single word. I simply listened to him. I am currently living in a tiny, rented studio apartment across town," he continued softly. "I actually went back to my old job, the exact same one I had right before Valerie convinced me it was strictly a job for total losers. I do not make a whole lot of money, but it is enough to get by." He took a long pause, as if he were desperately searching for the exact right words. Finally, he lifted his tired head and looked me directly in the eyes. And for the very first time in so many long years, I truly saw my son again. Not the wildly frustrated fake businessman, not the entirely dominated husband. I saw the little boy who had fallen off his bicycle. "Mom, I'm just so incredibly sorry," he said, and his voice completely shattered. "And I do not mean about the money. Well, yeah, at first I did. I totally lost my mind over it, but these last few months, I have been thinking a lot, and I am so deeply sorry about the photo album. I am sorry for saying all those horrible things to you. I'm incredibly sorry for making you feel like you had absolutely no value. I literally had to lose everything I had just to finally realize that the only thing in my life that carried any real value was you. And I treated it like total garbage." Thick tears were streaming rapidly down his hollow cheeks. These were definitely not the frantic tears of pure rage from back in Mr. Silverman's office. These were genuine, heavy tears. I remained completely silent for a very long while, just watching the gray pigeons pecking at the concrete sidewalk. True forgiveness is not just a simple light switch that you can flip on and off. It is a long, difficult road that you just have to start walking down. Words carry a lot of pain, Mark, I finally told him, my voice completely soft. And your words very nearly killed me. But the painful death of the woman who used to be your mother served a real purpose. It allowed the strong woman I am today to finally be born. And this new woman absolutely does not forget. But maybe, just maybe, she can slowly learn how to start all over again. He looked at me with a desperately trembling hope in his eyes. Once a month, I told him, firmly establishing the brand new rules of the game. The first Sunday of every single month, you can come over to my house for lunch. A nice home-cooked meal, exactly like we used to do, but absolutely no cell phones allowed at the table. And we will absolutely not discuss money. We will just talk about life, about the simple, everyday things, and we will slowly see if there is still a real son left somewhere inside of you, and if there is still a mother left inside of me. He nodded his head rapidly, over and over again, completely unable to form words. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. We did not hug. It simply was not the right time for that yet. I just stood up from the bench, gave him one final, long look, and walked back across the street toward my building. True redemption is never a free gift. It is incredibly hard work. And he was just starting his very first day on the job. A few weeks later, I completely finalized the two major projects that gave true meaning to absolutely everything that had happened. The first one involved Ray. One bright Saturday morning, I invited him and his wonderful family upstairs to share breakfast inside my shiny new kitchen. While his sweet daughter played happily with a doll that I had sewn an entire new wardrobe for, I casually handed Ray a thick envelope. "What exactly is this, Miss Claire?" he asked, looking incredibly confused. "Just open it," I told him. Inside was an official deed of sale. It was for a gorgeous 2-bedroom apartment in a nice building just around the corner that had recently gone up for sale. I had bought it outright earlier that week, putting it directly in his and his wife's names. He was completely speechless. His kind eyes instantly filled with heavy tears. His wife had to cover her mouth with both hands just to keep from screaming out loud. "But ma'am, this is... We absolutely cannot accept this. It is far too much." "Of course you can," I replied firmly. A man who steps up to bravely defend a completely helpless woman from her own flesh and blood is not just a building superintendent. He is a true gentleman. And gentlemen truly deserve a castle of their own. Your wonderful family stepped up and took care of me when my own family entirely turned their backs on me. So now, my family is taking care of yours. It is just the absolute law of life, Ray, and I am certainly not accepting a no for an answer. The second major project was with Mr. Silverman. Together, we officially established the Robert and Claire Parker Collection Foundation. The vast majority of our historical coins were never going to be sold. Instead, they were permanently donated to a major history museum right in the city, to be proudly displayed for the general public, complete with a beautiful bronze plaque telling the story of my late husband, a humble factory worker who spent his life dreaming about history. The massive amount of money generated from the few rare pieces we actually did sell was placed into a trust to fund an annual college scholarship for low-income history students. Robert's incredible life legacy was not going to be a fat check handed to an ungrateful son. It was going to be a golden opportunity for hundreds of bright young kids to get a real education. One quiet afternoon, shortly after all of that, I was sitting in my living room, which now featured a brand new, incredibly comfortable sofa. Resting perfectly on a beautiful cherry wood side table, sitting directly in the place of absolute honor was the photo album. The rich leather cover, freshly cleaned and treated with conditioning cream, shined beautifully under the soft light of a nearby reading lamp. I opened it up. I slowly turned the pages, watching my entire life proudly march right in front of my eyes. The beautiful wedding, Mark's difficult birth, our wonderful summer vacations down by the shore. It did not hurt me anymore. I felt a deep, incredibly quiet sense of pure pride. The profound pride of a strong woman who utterly refused to be treated like garbage. I closed the heavy album with total care. The beautiful story it contained belonged to the woman I used to be. But the story that truly mattered, the one that had ultimately won the war, was the incredible story of the strong woman I had officially become. My son carelessly threw a photo album into the garbage, fully believing he was deeply burying my past. But inside that black plastic bag, the only thing that actually died was the wealthy future he arrogantly believed he had secured.